everyone, as part of my collaboration with the lovely Mana over at Dolls Rescued, I'm going to be making a Blythe doll dress. I'm going to make a Christmas dress, so the first thing I'm going to do is to make a pattern. To do that, I've got this dress that I've made already, and I'm going to use it to make the pattern for the Christmas dress that I'm going to make. So I've turned the dress inside out, as you can see, and I'm now going to draw around. This is the front bit I'm drawing around now. Make sure you leave a seam allowance on it, because obviously this is sewn together, so it's going to be a bit bigger. You need it a little bit bigger so that you can sew around and it'll come out the same size. So I'm sort of drawing half of it, and then I'm going to fold it and cut it so that it makes a full pattern. And I'm only making the pattern for the top because the skirt is just an oblong of fabric. So now I've got the front bit done, I'm going to turn it over, and you can see that I'm doing it at a slight angle, and now I'm going to draw around the back piece, making sure that I add in the opening at the back to add the Velcro to. So round the arm, down the side, and then to the waistband. And I'm going to mark there where the waistband is, and then mark roughly the middle so that I can draw from there to the waistband. Make sure to add in the neck. So now I'm going to draw down to the waistband. Here we go. It's just rough. You can tidy it up afterwards. And then what I'm going to do is fold that in half. Fold this piece of paper in half. So I've got half of the back and half of the front, and I'm going to cut it out so that the pattern matches the front and the back. So draw down the middle of the front. Fold it in half. You'll see that the back part is at a bit of an angle. That's so that you've got room to, once it's on the doll, it will fold over, and that's where you'll put your studs, and it'll actually fold over the other piece of fabric. So let's cut that out. So once I've cut this out, I'll have my pattern. This is the pattern for the top, and as I say, the bottom is just a piece of fabric, an oblong piece of fabric. So I will measure the skirt on the dress that I've got made already, work out the width and the length, not forgetting to add on the seam allowance, and then I can write that on the top of my pattern, and then I'll have the measurements ready so that I can cut the skirt piece out when we need it later on. So here's my bodice piece cut out. So the next thing I need to do is measure the size of the skirt. So I'm going to measure the width of the hem and double it. So that'll give me the length of the fabric. There we go. So we've got it, it's at 9 inches. And so the width of my fabric will need to be 18 inches. And to find out the length you want your dress to be, the length of the skirt, measure from the hem to the waist, and don't forget to add on a little bit extra for the turn up at the bottom. You can adjust it at this stage if you want it longer or shorter. So for my skirt, I need it to be 18 by 6. So I'm going to write that onto the piece of paper for the bodice so that I'll have it for future reference. So the next thing we need to do is lay out our bodice pattern onto our fabric. I've got my fabric folded double widthways, so it goes the same way front and back. You need to make sure that the front of your bodice has the pattern going in the right direction. So I want my little reindeers to be the right way up. So my fabric is folded at the back so that it will be the right way up, whichever way round I decide to use my bodice. Here we go. The fronts will be the same on each side. So pin it into position. Once you've got it pinned into position, I'm going to draw around mine. You can just cut yours out if you want to, but I like to draw around it. I don't know why, I just find it easier. So that's what I'm doing here. Once you've drawn around it, you can then remove the pins and you can just cut around the line that you've drawn. I'm just going to pop a couple of pins through both layers of fabric so that when I cut it out, the material at the back doesn't shift. Okay, so now I've got that done, I can just quickly cut it out, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next stage. So now I've got my fabric cut out, I'm removing the pins and I'm going to make it so that I've got the right sides facing together, and I'm going to pin it back into position again. So the next thing we need to do now is sew down the back where you're going to fasten it and around the armholes. You don't need to sew down these pieces yet, just around the armholes and down the back. So you can see that I've sewn around each armhole and I've sewn down the back where it's going to fasten. The next thing we need to do is turn the fabric right side out. This can be a bit fiddly, but yeah, just do your best. So now we've got it turned the right side out, we're going to sew these sides together. And to do that, what you need to do is match up your armholes. So where your armholes is going to be, open out the sides like this on each piece of the bodice, on the front and the back. Match your armholes up in the middle and pop a couple of pins in. And we're just going to stitch along there. So in the middle of this seam will actually be your doll's armpit, the armpit of the dress. Do the same on each side, match up your armpits, pin the sides together, and so now I'm going to stitch along each side all the way along. And also while I'm doing that, I'm going to stitch around the neck so that I can finish that off ready for adding some decorative ribbon later. So I'm going to zigzag around the neck just there like that, just to tidy it up and stop it from fraying later. So I've got my sides sewn together and I've got my neck zigzagged around. So the next thing I'm going to do is try it on the doll, just to double check that it fits. It should fit perfectly well. I've made this dress before using the same pattern, so there we go. You can see that it fits so nicely on the front there, and then you can see at the back there's plenty of room to add your fastenings. So I have my skirt part cut out as per the measurements I did earlier. The next thing I'm going to do is gather along the top of the skirt here. I'm using white thread so that it shows up and I can pull it out later when I don't need the thread anymore, and I'm just going in out all the way along the top to gather the top of the skirt. Make sure you leave a little tiny bit ungathered each end of your skirt fabric so that you can turn it over for the seam. Now we've got the skirt gathered, we need to attach it to the bodice. So decide which part of the bodice is going to be the outside, and we need to attach the skirt part to the outside of the bodice. So right sides together, gently ease your gathered skirt part and pin it onto the front of your body. Try and make it so that you've got even gathers all the way along your skirt. You can see that I've turned a little bit over at each end. That's going to be for the seam. So I'm putting my pins in this way so that I can leave them in to stitch. when I'm stitching it, I can see them and remove them more easily. So now I've got my skirt pinned to my bodice and it's all ready to be stitched. So I'm going to sew across there, and I'm going to make sure that I zigzag along that edge as well, just to stop it from fraying later on. So here's my skirt attached to my bodice. You can see that's come out pretty well. I'm fairly pleased with that. So I'll now go back and do my zigzagging just to finish it off. The next thing we're going to do is join our back seam. So make sure that the seams meet at the waist, and then we need to not sew all the way from the hem to the bottom, but about 2/3 of the way from the hem to the waist. So you can see that I've zigzagged the raw edge, I've sewn my seam down the back there, and I've done the zigzagging around the hem as well, so that we can just turn that over and stitch it when we're ready. So the next thing we're going to do is turn our hem over and stitch it. So I'm just going to pop a few pins in there, ready for stitching. So here I've got my hem all ready to stitch, and I'm just going to do a straight stitch all the way around the bottom. Here we are. This is my hem all done. So let's turn the dress right side out. Basically, apart from fastening the back and decorating, your dress is done now. I'm going to add press studs on the back of mine, but you could do it with Velcro or even ribbon ties if you wanted to. Also, I'm going to sew some ribbon around the neck to tidy that up, but it could be just as easily could be left, it wouldn't matter. So I'm going to just fold a thin piece of ribbon over and use it like bias binding, and I'm going to just hand stitch it over that zigzagging just to tidy it up a little bit. As it's only a short piece of fabric that you're doing, the ribbon will be fine for your bias binding. Normally bias binding is cut at an angle. The ribbon isn't, but it'll work fine for this little short piece of neck that we're doing. The next thing I'm going to do is add some plain red ribbon around the bottom of my skirt. So I'm just working out where I want that to go and pinning it in position. You can see that on mine I've got the reindeer. I'm pinning it over the reindeer's body at the bottom. You may need to measure yours if you haven't got a pattern that you can use to mark where you want it to go. So I'm just going to straight stitch that into position, trim off the bit at the end there so I can fold it under. I've also added a little star button on the bodice there, and I think I'm going to add a little belt with some charms on it just to finish it off. A little belt, ribbon belt with some Christmas charms. So here you are, you can see I've got a little angel, I've got some little jingly bells on the bottom, and I've got a little snowman on there. So I hope this was useful to someone. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.